get home from school, turn on my TV. Who are these friends staring right back at me? Now that we're older, why don't you come over and go back in time with me? 90s babies, nostalgia.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Jessica, and this is 90s Babies Nostalgia, where two 90s babies are having fun. We're rounding off spooky season.
You just cut off my second. Oh no, sorry. That was your whole first line.
Yeah. Are we starting over?
No, just to be clear, we are not sponsored by or affiliated with any of the studios, the actors, anything involved in this episode, discussed in this episode. We just like talking about media, and today what we're talking about is Rocky Horror Picture Show. We are in full support of the strikes. WGA has luckily reached an agreement, but SAG-AFTRA is still out there fighting for fair wages. So we chose Rocky Horror because it is an independent film. It is a British production. However, it does blur the lines. We want to recognize that it is in a gray area because it is currently owned and distributed by Disney. And Fox did have a hand in the original production because they had the distribution rights, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For instance, the majority of this cast is from the original show, which we'll get into later, but Fox insisted that two of the main cast members be American, which is why Brad and Janet are played by American actors. So it's a gray area, but it's based on a musical. It's a British production. It's an incredible independent film. So
Yeah, and true indie, $1.6 million budget. Like it does fit a lot of things we're going for, but we did want to recognize that this one, it leans maybe a little more grayer than the other ones we've been doing, but it's one we both enjoy and we both have nostalgia and memories connected to. So we thought it was still a good fit to cover.
And also we kind of just pointed out, it's like distribution companies have to agree to the terms of the production company. So anyway, not getting into that. We don't really know what we're talking about. Don't quote us. Don't cite us in a paper, okay?
We've done a lot of research, but also our research is very confusing, and I feel like I know a lot more about everything, but also I know nothing.
And if you're listening, I just want you to know Jess and I both look fly as hell right now. And by fly as hell, I mean Jess looks fly as hell. She looks ready for a Harry Styles concert, a Boy Genius concert. She looks glittery and glam. And I look like a first day prostitute as a maid.
No, you also look glam.
Thanks. I have my makeup is much gaudier. Yours is much more tasteful.
I do have a lot of glitter on my face, but it's picking up in the camera. But
I just really piled it on. I was like, I think this is the worst makeup I've ever done, but that's actually kind of appropriate.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we could have gone way gaudier and it still would have fit because it's Rocky Horror, guys.
Yes.
It's 1975 independent musical comedy based on the 1973 stage production.
Mm-hmm.
Produced by Lou Alder and Michael White, and then it was directed by Jim Sharman, and then written by Sharman and Richard O'Brien. O'Brien is Riff Raff in the film, and so again, multi-hyphenate. We got a lot of people doing a lot of things contributing to make this amazing indie film happen.
Yeah, we didn't plan that, but similarly to Shaun of the Dead, we've got a star who is also the writer of the thing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so cool. It was filmed October to December of 1974. I've been calling this out because I just think these turnaround times are really, really amazing.
Especially when the musical was so new.
Oh, yeah. It's just wild. These creatives, they cannot be stopped. It's a parody and a tribute to science fiction and horror movies from like the 1930s through the 1970s. Specifically, O'Brien really, really, really loved B horror films and Hammer films. So Hammer is one who has done like Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein, The Mummy, and Amanda added plus muscle movies and rock and roll, which is so true. It's just a combination of like all of it.
Yeah, he wanted to include those elements and pay tribute to them all.
Very fun introduction to our cast here, which I think is like so awesome, is most of the cast are from the original London stage production. So Tim Curry, Little Nell, Patricia Quinn, and Richard O'Brien are all from the original stage production. Tim Curry is our main character. Well, I guess, yeah, one of the main characters.
Yeah, I'd say we have 3.
Yeah.
Really only 2. I don't count Brad, but yeah.
Yeah. He plays Dr. Frankenfurter.
And
And
Tim
then,
Curry, if you don't know him, I just have to point out, he is an incredible character actor. He originated this role of Frankenfurter, which he is most iconic for. It was his huge, really big role. And a lot of the cast were doing their own makeup when they were on stage. But he also, for our original Nostalgia 90s Babies audience, is the voice of Nigel Thornberry in The Wild Thornberrys. And to my nightmare's detriment, played Pennywise in the 1990 It, which made me afraid to shower for multiple years because I watched that when I was way too young because my brother put it on. And there's that scene where he comes through the drain, and I was convinced that would happen. But he's just an incredible character actor. And now, since he had a stroke in the 2010s, he is in a wheelchair and predominantly does voice acting, though he was the narrator, criminologist in the recent Rocky Horror remake by Baz Luhrmann.
And then we have our other 2 main characters, Janet Weiss and Brad Majors. These are our American actors that we referenced earlier. So that's Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick.
Mother of all mothers. I fucking love Susan Sarandon. I refer to her as the mother of my childhood. Not that I didn't have a mother. I have a mother. Susan Sarandon played the mother. Like, I think of Stepmom. I watched that all the time growing up. She was in so many things, but also, like, she's so political. She came out as bisexual recently, even though she's old and didn't need to do that. Sorry, like, she's ageless, but she is getting older. And just, like, I love her. I love her so much. I don't give a fuck about the other guy. No, I wrote just a note that he's been in some Disney stuff for our 90s babies. He was Mr. Bradley in the Hannah Montana movie, which I don't remember, but I thought it was interesting that because his name is Brad in this. He was Big Papa in Teen Beach Movie, and he is the voice of Grandpa Clyde Flynn in Phineas and Ferb.
Oh.
That's Barry Bostwick that plays Brad.
Yeah. And then we have Richard O'Brien, who we mentioned was one of the writers, but he also plays Riff Raff.
Yes, and he is also the voice of the dad in Phineas and Ferb.
Wild.
And, yeah. He has a very iconic voice, especially as Riff Raff, like the way he uses his accent. He identifies with he, him pronouns, but as third gender, which is a little bit of an older term before we used non-binary or gender fluid as commonplace terminology. But yeah, does not identify with the gender spectrum, which I thought was important to note since he wrote this, and transness is a huge theme in this film, if you don't know.
Huge. Yeah. Then some of our more like side characters, but still are important, is we have Magenta, who's played by Patricia Quinn, and Columbia, who is played by Nell Campbell, or better known as her stage name, Little Nell. Dr. Everett Scott was played by Jonathan Adams. And then Rocky Horror is played by Peter Hinwood. And then you just have to mention this. Very small character, but still important. Meatloaf plays Eddie, guys. Of course, Meatloaf is in this film.
I know nothing about Meatloaf other than any time that he pops up, everyone's like, of course, Meatloaf. Like, when I saw his name on the credits, after watching this last night, I went, of course, Meatloaf.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
I
just
would
seems like a
say,
fun guy.
yeah, he's a little more, I don't want to like super dive into this, but he's a little more controversial in his later years. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't agree with a lot of his thoughts on climate change and
Oh, fuck him
COVID-19 and
then.
things
Sorry
like
about
that.
that.
But regardless, he's super, super iconic. And like Bat Out of Hell trilogy is like huge for that genre. The style, everything, like he did make a huge contribution there. So his early year stuff is like actually really, really awesome. But
Mm-hmm.
in later years, we can just like forget about him.
Fuck him. Well, you
Yeah.
know, spoiler alert, he fucking dies. So in
Yeah.
this, in this,
In this. Oh, he is dead. He died last year,
deuces.
I
Sorry.
think.
Don't at me, people. Anyway, so Rocky Horror opens up with a shot of female lips. They are the lips of Magenta, but the voice, the singing voice of Riff Raff, who, by the way, are siblings, which really threw me because they feel very sexual sometimes. And it's a whole song about the science fiction double feature picture show, right?
Mhm.
And it's an opening credit scene that lasts for over 4 minutes. Jess and I
Mhm.
rented the same copy on YouTube. And when I went to click play and this went on for 4 minutes, I went, am I in the end credits? Like, did it just pick up where Jess left off? No, it's that long. But it tells
Uh-huh.
you exactly what it's about. So a lot of these songs are very narrative.
Mhm. It's set in a fictional town of Denton.
Which I fully thought was Dayton, Ohio. I thought Dayton was called Denton. It's not. There is a Denton, Texas that people argue it's could be based in, but fictional town.
Fictional town. So we open up at a wedding where we see Janet catch the bouquet and she looks excited. And then we get the song Damn It, Janet, and Janet and Brad get engaged during the song. And this is when we get our first flash to the narrator, who I
Is
think
the
is just a very,
criminologist.
yeah, criminologist slash narrator. And he's like very important because a lot of musicals use this like usage of a narrator. Like it's a very, very common thing in musicals. But we get our first flash to him, and he mentions that Janet and Brad are going on a strange journey. And so,
He's reading from a book called The
yeah,
Denton Affair.
yeah, to visit Dr. Everett Scott on a rainy evening. So then we flash to them. They're driving, their tire blows out. The spare is flat as well, which is confusing. And so they go in search of help. And Janet's like, I saw a castle up the road. Let's go that way. And so they head towards the castle.
Mm-hmm. They arrive and they're greeted by Riff Raff, who is a parody of Igor from Frankenstein. Is that his name, Igor?
Mm-hmm.
You know who I'm talking about, like the assistant with the big hunch. So he has a big hunchback, except it's very clearly fake. And also, as they're walking up to the house, there's also motorcyclists that they've seen come up, and we get the song "The Frankenstein Palace." And yeah, they're greeted by Riff Raff, who's very quiet and mysterious, and he's like, "I guess you better come in. And you're lucky that it's one of Master's festivity nights." And so there's like you can hear party music, and then they
And
enter.
laughter.
Yeah, and they enter the ballroom, where immediately Time Warp happens. If you don't know Time Warp, you know Time Warp. It is the most iconic song of this film, and it kind of explains what's going on, but also makes it very unclear.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You just got to do a jump to the left and step to the right. Um,
But it's the pelvic thrust.
yeah. Janet Janet's like a little nervous. Like she's not really into this. It's making her uncomfortable. And Brad is like, we need to freaking get a telephone. We're not going anywhere with the current state of the car. So you need to just calm down and suck it up.
And he says this might be a cultural folk dance.
Oh, he said that?
Because yeah, before Frankenfurter shows up, he's like, maybe this is just a cultural thing. Because in the ballroom where they're having the time warp, there's a huge banner that says Annual Transylvania Convention. And so he's like, maybe they'll do more folk dances for us. And then Frankenfurter shows up in dramatics as always.
Yep. And we get Sweet Transvestite, which, like, if you don't know Time Warp, you freaking know that song. Like, I would say it's the second most iconic to the film.
Yeah, and also I forgot to put disclaimer that I meant to for this recording, but the term transvestite is often used as a slur in common in language today and has been in the past. However, this film uses it in a much more liberal way. It is they refer to themselves as being from transvestite Transylvania, and like I mentioned, the writer is not cisgendered, and so transness is a huge theme throughout it. So we will be using that term in the context of discussing the film, but it's not derogatory, and don't ever use that word about someone. Okay?
Correct.
Be cool, don't use slurs, guys.
Yeah. And when he comes down, Janet, like, freaks out and, like, passes out. She's just, like, really struggling.
Oh my god, she faints so many times in this movie.
Yeah. And then he sings a song, he does his thing, he goes back up the elevator to his laboratory, and Riff Raff and Magenta just start stripping Brad and Janet. They're taking off all their clothes.
Yeah, because the end of Frankenfurter, he says, like, perhaps the rain's the cause. I'll stop the cause, but not the symptom or something. And so then they just take off all these clothes because they're wet, but they're also not wet at this point. They're perfectly dry.
Yeah. And so then they give them, like, new clothes that are kind of, it's like a robe, but it's not a robe. It's like a long white.
That's after
down.
Furter gives them the clothes when they come up to the auditorium, which you wrote an aquarium. It's not an aquarium. It's a gallery. It's a scientific gallery with an auditorium where
I did not
Frankenfurter.
aquarium.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
when I
scrolled
wrote
down.
aquarium, it is an aquarium.
Yes, Rocky's in an aquarium or a tank. But yes, they so they take the elevator up to where Furter mentioned he was building a man, and this is his big scientific night, so they can come. And all of the people are now up on a stage watching, and Frankenfurter is now in, like, a surgeon's gown with a beautiful pearl necklace and gives robes to Janet and Brad. And then is that when he starts, like, he does his whole monologue and starts making Rocky come to life? I think so. Yeah. And Rocky's like a mummy in a giant aquarium, apparently. I wrote tank. And this is the gayest shit I've ever seen. They literally shoot rainbow colors into this tank to make Rocky come to life. He's unveiled, and he's just the most muscular himbo you've ever seen. And then Eddie rides in, Meatloaf, breaks the wall to this science lab and randomly sings a song about loving rock and roll, which I thought was a strong choice because it had nothing to do with the plot. And he kind of makes a mess of everything. He's kind of going after Rocky. He has a big scar over the top of his head, and that's not explained until later. And Columbia clearly likes him. Everyone else is scared. He's riding his motorcycle everywhere. And then Frankenfurter chases him with a pickaxe and murders him.
Correct. Then after this, I don't know, everyone just decides they're okay with that. No one's okay with it, but they just accept that this is happening. Then Brad and Janet are shown off to their separate rooms for the evening, and we see Riff Raff and Magenta, like, in this room with this, like, monitor system that has, like, a handle that they pull, and it, like, is cameras in all the different rooms. So they're spying on Brad and Janet.
And they know that. I don't know about Brad, but Janet sees the camera immediately.
Oh, yeah, they're aware that they're being spied on. Yeah. And they, like, Janet and Brad's room also has this monitor system, so they can also be spying on other people as well. Like, they have the ability to also use it.
To be fair, voyeuristic is a word used in Time Warp.
Yeah. So then Frankenfurter goes into Brad's room, dressed as Janet, also has Janet's voice.
He goes to Janet's room first, dressed as Brad.
No, he doesn't. He goes to Brad's room. No, he doesn't.
He goes to Janet's room first.
He does not.
He does.
He doesn't.
I watched it last night.
I know for a fact he doesn't.
He goes to Janet's room first.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, he does.
He doesn't.
Yes, he does.
We are going to have to edit this because he doesn't.
He does.
He doesn't.
Are you looking it up?
Yeah.
Because I need you to know that he goes to Janet's room and then he goes to Brad's room and they have identical scenes, except he has sex in a more traditional intercourse with Janet, and then he goes down on Brad, and it's while he's going down on Brad that Riff Raff is like, Rocky escaped. They go off into a bridal suite, and Brad and Janet are kept in separate rooms. Later during the night, Frank goes to Janet's room disguised as Brad and has sex with her, promising not to tell Brad. Afterwards, during the night, Frank goes to Brad disguised as Janet and has sex with him too.
I guess you're right. I don't know why I thought it was Brad first. Okay.
No, because I know, because at first he goes in dressed as Brad, and Janet thinks that she's making out with Brad, and they're gonna have sex, and then she's like, oh my god, I've never done it before, and he realizes, like, it's Frank and Furter, and she's really, like, hesitant and pushing back, and it's a little, like, questionable about consent, and then she's like, promise you won't tell Brad? And he's like, I won't tell Brad. And then she's all giggly and very for it all of a sudden, and then they have sex, and then we see Frankenfurter in Brad's room, and they have almost an identical exchange where he is dressed as Janet, and then it's revealed that he's Frankenfurter, and Brad's like, oh my god, I've never, and he's like, I know, and back and forth, and then Brad's like, promise you won't tell Janet? And Frankenfurter's like, I promise. And then Frankenfurter starts going down on Brad, like we see his head go all over his genitals, and then during all of this riffraff, because he's a little bitch, was antagonizing Rocky, so then Rocky escaped his chains, runs outside, runs around in the mud, in the rain and stuff. Sorry for the sirens going on right now. So he runs around outside, and then he runs back anyway, the Riff Raff uses the TV system to contact Frankenfurter as he's going down on Brad.
Yeah.
To be like, Rocky's escaped, Magenta's released the hounds. So it has to be Janet first, because otherwise, because then the Rocky thing, sequentially.
No. It is Janet first. You're right. I will give you that.
Thank you.
I really thought it was Brad first, but no, you are right that it's Janet.
No, you were
first.
so sure, and I was just like, I can literally see it in my head.
But also, while the hounds are released on Rocky, and after Frankenfurter and Brad finish everything, they're still sitting in the room, and Janet is spying on them and sees like Frankenfurter lying in the bed and Brad like smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, Janet came back to the science room and is spying from them there, and then finds Rocky in the tank.
Yeah.
And she dresses his wounds, and immediately the girl is just dripping wet, and and she's like, suddenly she's been awakened.
Janet is now all super horny.
Yes. She's had sex once, and now she needs to be doing it all the time. And she gets a song, and we get Magenta and Columbia in their very normal looking room compared to the rest of this mansion, just watching and making fun of her the whole time. It's great.
Yeah, we get touch me. She sleeps with Rocky, and then we see Dr. Everett Scott show up at the castle, and Frankenfurter thinks that like he planned on Brad and Janet being here, and that this was all arranged because he knew that Brad and Janet were going to see Dr. Scott as well. But actually, he came to come see Eddie.
So yeah, and Frankenfurter says he knows who Dr. Scott is because now he's employed by our government to investigate UFOs. So this is the first nod that these are actually aliens.
I was going to say, this is when we, like, it is kind of inferred that, yes, it's aliens.
But he came to find Eddie because he's his nephew.
And they all have a very uncomfortable dinner. The whole dinner seems awkward. I'm not going to get into it. But at the end of dinner, Frankenfurter, like, rips the tablecloth off. And in the, like, hollow of the table is Eddie's, like, chopped up body.
It was pretty dope.
Yeah, it was. And everyone like freaks out. And starts
Columbia's hysterical.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And starts like run away, and Furter like flips the switch and it glues everyone's feet to the ground.
They run back to the lab, which again,
Yeah.
stupid. It's the top of the castle, and that's where all his junk is. So then he flips the transducer that glues them.
It glues them. And then he flips something called a Medusa switch, which then like turns them all into statues. And so Dr. Scott, Janet, Brad, Rocky, and Columbia are all statues. And Furter picks them up and moves all of them to a stage, and he dresses them up in like corsets and tights.
Mm-hmm.
And then he unmedusas all of them.
One by one for their own verses.
Mm-hmm. And there's a show, and they're singing and they're dancing and they're in a swimming pool, and there's a lot of touching, and it's just very
Yeah, they have an orgy in a swimming pool at the end.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, the party is an orgy party, right? Like, what else is this? Yeah.
And then Riff Raff and Magenta come in.
Yeah. Tired of the bullshit.
In new outfits. Riff Raff,
the best fucking outfits,
is completely gone. Magenta's hair is now up in a Bride of Frankenstein do, and they say, "You've been playing around too much. You've been getting too loose with it. We're going back. We're your new bosses, and we're going back to Transvestite, Transylvania." And Frankenfurter sings this whole song about how actually he wanted to go home this whole time, which like he didn't. He said that he didn't, but anyway. And they're like, "Cool, we're gonna kill you anyway." And the Riff Raff just starts killing people.
Yeah, he has this like laser beam thing that kind of looks like a pitchfork.
He said it's an antimatter gun.
Yeah, and he kills Columbia first. And then I'm like, what the fuck did Columbia do? She's just upset over poor Eddie. Like, poor Columbia. And then he kills Frankenfurter, and then he has to use the beam like multiple times to kill Rocky. And Rocky is like upset about Frankenfurter's death and is like carrying him on his shoulders and like climbing up this thing, and then they fall into the
radio
pool.
tower that's part of the set, so it immediately falls because it's not a real radio tower.
Yeah. And then Brad, Janet, and Dr. Scott leave. And
Riff Raff's like, "Get the fuck out of here."
Yep. And then Riff Raff beams the house back to Transylvania. We see it like pew up into the sky.
And that's Rocky Horror. And if you're confused, I watched it last night for the third time in my life, and I was confused as well. And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Is that it makes no fucking sense.
It makes no sense. When Amanda texted me last night, I was like, yeah, I really struggled writing the summary because I was like, somehow all of this matters and none of it matters at all.
And I think that's been interesting about this movie and Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah.
And like, we're not as into comedy or genre films. Usually what we have, or what we talk about, have a very normal structure of a plot. And so both of these films are just so ridiculous that it's like literally nothing that happens matters because it's not really sequential. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
Like,
none of
there's
it
not really
has
a cause and effect.
And there's like, yes, like horrible things happen, like death, and big things happen, like sex, but none of it is set up in a way for the stakes to be there. So everything is low stakes and it's all just happening.
And
So
there's
you're
no
like,
growth.
No.
Like, half our cast is dead by the end of this one, and the other half are running through the woods naked.
Yeah. It's just chaos. The whole film is chaos. I, like Amanda, haven't seen it. I have seen it way more than 3 times in my life, but I've not seen it in many years. Probably like 5 or 6, maybe more than that. But this is one that I would always watch on TV if it was on TV growing up as a kid. And I have gone to the stage production version, which we will get into, I guess now. I think the big thing that we should say with Rocky Horror is that, like, when this film came out, and even in the original stage production, it wasn't well received at all. Like, not even like, oh, it just wasn't that well received. Like, no, everyone was like, what the fuck is going on? This is horrible. It makes no sense, which those things are true to an extent.
It makes no sense. It's absurdly gay and trans. It's a parody homage to what were already unpopular, highly genred like
It's a
tropes.
very clearly low budget, like very.
And it was made by a bunch of nobodies at the time.
Yeah. And so a few years after, around like 78, so they continued to play it like in Halloween in theaters,
Mhm.
following the film, like really 76, this started to kick off. But in 78, it became very popular as a midnight movie with audience participation and shadow casts. And so this is one of our big things we get where you go to a showing, you're watching the movie, but you have a cast of actors that are performing along to the movie. And I don't know if there's any other films that have gained popularity with shadow cast. I feel like Rocky Horror is one of the big ones to make this a thing, but this
Mhm.
really has turned Rocky Horror into a cult. Like, it
Yeah.
has a cult following. People love it. As a theater kid, I grew up and saw it multiple times. In San Jose, we had a theater that did a showing once a month. And so I think I saw it 2 or 3 times. And it is just fun. It makes sense that it does have a cult following and people love it because it is such an experience and a
Mhm.
way to just like be yourself and let loose and be comedic.
When was the first time you saw it?
16, I think junior year.
Was it on TV or a shadow cast?
Oh, no, no, no. The first time I ever saw it, I probably was like 8 years old
Oh,
on
wow.
TV. And then I saw it as a shadow cast in high school.
Mm.
Have you seen it as a shadow cast? You have.
Yeah, yeah. So I was older than you.
Mm.
Our parents are very different, so I definitely was not watching this on TV. I
Oh, yeah, my mom helped me rip holes into my fishnets because I was
Oh
like,
my god,
"Mom,
that's
these
so
need holes and
cool.
I don't know how to do it." And she's like, "We did this all the time in the 80s," and just like helped
That
me.
also must be so fun for people like your parents because this came out in 75 that like they grew up as teenagers and in their 20s going to screenings of this and now their kids are still doing it. Like that's just so cool.
Yeah, and my mom was a huge, like, concert junkie like me, really into the rock scene, really into all these things that, like, as someone growing up in Kansas probably shouldn't be into and frowned upon, and she really embraced all of her interests.
Mhm.
So it was not strange at all when I was like, "I'm gonna go to this with my friends." They're like, "Great, go ahead, go have fun. Let me rip holes in your fishnets for you."
Nice. My first time was my first year of college. I knew of Rocky Horror only from like that last year because it's in The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Mhm.
So I had read that book and seen that movie, and that came out in like 2012-ish. And then that fall around Halloween, my friends who were theater kids, and I was in a dorm production with them at the time, they were like, "Hey, you want to go to a Rocky Horror show?" And I was like, "I have no fucking clue what that is." Sure. And like if you go, there's official fan pages for Rocky Horror, and there's a whole page for like if it's your first time, if you're a virgin. And it starts off with like if you've seen the movie, great, here's what you can expect. If you haven't seen the movie, stop reading. The blinder you go in, the better. Um,
Mhm.
so I went in very, very blind. I wore like a proper dress because my friend told me to like dress up, and it was kind of like you can be like fishnets or you can be like Janet. And like, so I was more Janet. I don't
Yeah.
remember why, but I do know that they gave us these like rooster necklaces, which I looked up and that's not like a thing for Rocky Horror. It must have been a theater specific, but that was a shadow cast. And I
Mhm.
was very confused by like if I should be watching the film or the actors.
Mhm.
But it was
Yeah.
still fun. And then I did it once in Oslo at not a shadow cast, but a karaoke screening.
Oh, fun. That sounds
Mhm.
really fun. We'll talk a little bit more about maybe not shadowcast, but like counterpoint dialogue. But before we get in
Mhm.
that, I want to say where it got popular was the Waverly Theater in New York City. I think we should see that. And also that it's considered to be the longest running release film in film history. So
Yeah.
it's never been pulled since its original 1975 release and continues to play in cinemas to today. So for something that was like not well received at all, it now has this just huge impact on theater and film,
A huge
which is,
legacy.
yeah, it's truly amazing.
I remember in our high school, our drama teacher, I didn't take drama, but you did. And she would kind of take requests sometimes to consider for her musical, but not that much. But people, I think, every year would ask for Rocky Horror, and she would be like, I'll do it when I retire.
Which I don't think she ever ended up doing, because she did retire, but I don't know if she ever did it.
Yeah, she pushed the boundaries already, but I can't imagine getting this one by.
Yeah.
We did a rather graphic depiction of Chicago that when we were there.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, and what I thought was cool about the release that I told you is it has to do with a Fox distribution rule that they didn't pull things from being released after a certain amount of time like most companies do. And when
Yeah.
Disney bought Fox, they started to archive a lot, the Disney Vault, which is pretty infamous. They every once in a while would be like, we're bringing this out of the vault.
Yeah.
To make it like an exclusive time. So they started to archive a lot of Fox's films, but they didn't do Rocky Horror because of how beloved it is and how well known it is for always being in theaters.
Yep.
It's just like when you can like stick it to Disney.
Yeah. And I think the big part of like, if you've ever seen the film or if you think it's weird, like go see a shadow cast. Like I highly recommend it, because the other thing is this counterpoint dialogue, which is essentially when you go, like Amanda kind of mentioned it, like it changes theater to theater, but there are some things that stay the same regardless of where you go. And so part of it is props. Like everyone I've ever been to, there's never been a necklace involved for the versions, but if it's your first time going to a
They do a virgin
shadow
sacrifice.
cast, they do a virgin sacrifice, and every one I've been to, it's just V and red lipstick on your forehead to mark those who are versions. And I know that's a pretty standard thing, like that can be expected in most shows. But there's this thing of everyone in the crowd, you have about 50, normally it's 40 to 50% of people are versions, and then the rest are people who have seen it before. So they know what the call outs are. So people are shouting back at the screen the whole time. So like every time Brad's on stage or he's introduced, everyone screams asshole.
Which
Whenever
he is.
Yeah, whenever the criminologist narrator's on stage, you go, he's got no fucking neck. Because if you've watched the film, he has no neck. And it changes theater to theater. There are sayings that are more popular in some theaters over the other. So it creates this like comedic experience. Like Rocky Horror is its own comedic experience. And then going and watching it and being able to like, if you want to, you can shout out a line. Like you can make them up on the spot and shout it out. And that is like embraced. And sometimes if you go to multiple showings at the same theater and people pick up the line that you made, it will then become popularized in that theater. Like it is just a very unique experience. Yeah.
And cultural phenomenon. I think it's like you feel like you're in a community for that hour and a half that you're in the theater. And supposedly, this was surprisingly detailed on Wikipedia. This started about 5 months into the show being popular at the Waverly Theater, which, if you don't know, is the IFC Center. It still exists, though it's not showing Rocky Horror, and I'm very bitter about it. But supposedly, Louis Faris Jr., sorry about the sirens coming every time I'm talking. Okay. This normally quiet teacher, upon the character Janet placing a newspaper over her head to protect herself from the rain, yelled, "Buy an umbrella, you cheap bitch." And that was like one of the first ones. So if you don't, that's what Jess is talking about with callouts, where like or counterpoint dialogues. I've never experienced that outside of Rocky Horror, where like it's commonplace. And you're not expected to know them. You can make your own, like Jess said. Apparently, also a lot of them came from like the cast just trying to keep each other on their toes and knowing the dialogue so well that they would like throw shit out in the middle of productions.
Yeah. And like you bring props, and you don't have to bring props, but you can. So like when Janet puts the newspaper on her head, you bring newspaper and you put it on your head. During the wedding scene, you can bring rice or confetti and toss that. Like it is just super interactive. And this is why it's the longest film release. This is why it's continued to be shown. A lot of places you can see it year round, but especially right now in October, theaters will do just October showings of it. And you just don't get this anywhere else. And that's what makes it so fun and so nostalgic and so like memorable to talk about. Because I'm like, even though I haven't gone to a showing like that since high school, I have some very, very fantastic memories from those experiences. I loved that during Time Warp in the film, you see all the dancers doing the time warp, but they're not on the same beat. Like some of them are going slightly faster or starting moves behind others. And because this is like a party, right? He's invited all these people to have this big giant orgy. It makes sense that they wouldn't all be on the same beat. And so I really love that they included that, because in a lot of stage productions or things that are stage productions and then turned into film, all the choreography has to be on point. Everyone has to hit the right beats. And I like that they were like, no, it doesn't make sense. Like, let's make
These
this
are all
feel
actors who have been doing it for a couple of years too, so I'm sure they're like they know it all so well that it's easier to do it loose.
Yeah. Also,
I wrote
Amanda
Time Warp is the cha-cha slide of Halloween.
Seriously.
Because, okay, if you think it's Thriller, it's not. Because Thriller doesn't explain the choreography the way that Time Warp does.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not as explicit as Cha-Cha Slide because there's only a couple things, but, like, they literally tell you what to do. And so, Time Warp is the Cha-Cha Slide of Halloween.
Yep. I also wrote that I'm kind of into this monitor system, but it doesn't seem very effective because there are multiple times where they're like, Rocky escapes. And I'm like, guys, if we just had a normal monitor system where we saw every camera on one screen, he probably wouldn't have escaped because you would have seen this happening. But they have the ineffective, like, you got to crank it every time you change the channel.
But that said, Riff Raff intentionally antagonized Rocky and let him escape. Riff Raff was
100%.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I like the fact that you're kind of into the surveillance, the Big Brother aspect.
Oh, I am.
Talking about Rocky escaping, though, why does he run all the way outside and around the castle in the rain only to come back to the lab and get into his tank? I get the returning to the tank in a way of like it's his womb, but like, why?
Yeah.
That's the highest point in the castle. You escape the castle just to come back into the highest point in the castle where everyone's going to expect you to be? But he is also only about 7 hours old by the dinner scene, so I guess I have to keep that in mind.
I like that you noted here during the dinner scene, Frankenfurter says, formal wear is optional, and then no one gets dressed. Everyone just goes in their undergarments or what they were wearing.
Janet and Rocky just got caught boning, and Janet's fully in her underwear at dinner. Which, by the way, we didn't talk about it much, but Frankenfurter is not happy with Rocky for boning Janet. But but Rocky just has like an uncontrollable libido. So
yeah, it's not his fault.
He says it in the song that they sing at the end that all he knows to trust is the rush of lust. I wrote the Zen room just because I like that they have a Zen room.
The other thing that I did not put on here because I wanted to surprise you, I wrote this in my notes as I was watching it, and I still kind of stand by it. Is Riff Raff hot? Because I think maybe he's hot. Like, because he's kind of like half dead and a little in everyone's shit, and he causes a lot of chaos, but he also takes charge. I don't know. I think he's kind of hot. Like,
oh my god! No. I was gonna say maybe in his final outfit, but
Yeah.
no, because his hair is so absurd in that outfit. He has the dumbest ponytail on the top of his head that curves fully around.
I thought that was the best.
Also, at the start of this film, when they're at the wedding, outside of the church are Riff Raff and Magenta dressed like those like Norman Rockwell-esque pitchfork people from the paintings standing outside of the church, but you don't know that it's them, but then it is them. And like I just thought that was cool because when I was watching the wedding, I was like, why the fuck are these pitchfork people out here? And then when he came in the end with his like pitchfork thingy, I was like, oh, of course it was that fucker.
Yep.
No, he's not hot. But I like how I could see how his personality could be hot.
Yeah. I'm standing by it. I think that maybe he is hot. I'm not going to say like he's the hottest person ever, but like he's maybe hot.
We have very different types.
Yeah, I also don't know if Riff Raff is my type, but here we are. The other things we've kind of briefly mentioned, but like we have to talk about like Rocky Horror's influence on two things, but punk rock culture. A lot of like the 80s, 90s punk aesthetic can be credited to Rocky Horror, like the ripped up fishnets, the use of corsets. Like a lot of that is now seen as like punk fashion. And it wasn't really in the media or shown until this film. You also noted here that the costume director claims she did no research for the costumes. And I want to clarify because I read more information on this. That's not, she was intentional in her use of certain items for like the more punk look. The no research is specifically in reference to Brad and Janet. She literally did not research like what Americans were wearing in cities, what Americans were wearing in suburbia. She just had an idea of what like a standard boring American would wear and then put them in that. And she had never traveled to America. So this was kind of like people actually didn't love that she didn't do any research and just went really stereotypical. But also I think it looks fine.
I thought they looked like they should look. They're squares and they look like squares.
Yeah, totally.
No, I just thought it was interesting that she like it's a very bold thing. And Sue Blaine, the costume director, is so famous for this that her name is one of the common call outs in shows with a certain point of dialogue. I don't know. She kind of claims that like the punk aesthetic is largely credited to her work on Rocky Horror, the ripped fishnets, the glitter, the colored hair. And I'm not saying she's wrong because I don't know, but pop culture historians are a newer thing and fashion historians, I guess. So I'm like very curious as to how accurate that is. It might be very accurate. It's just like I love the confidence that she can make that claim.
Yeah. I think if you look at like stage productions around that time, and right, she was the costume director for the stage production as well, so she did both. I think what Broadway used on stage has always been like a little more feminine, a little more out there, things like that. So I don't know if she can take full credit, but like I think she can take some.
It is also harder for us to say this as people in 2023 discussing this film from 1975, off the stage production from 1973, because I don't even have a full grasp on when the punk timeline begins. I know it starts in the 70s and rises in the 80s, but like, yeah, it's hard for us to really look at it in retrospect as people who didn't live through it.
Totally. And then the other thing is its influence on the LGBTQ community, specifically Shadowcast productions. A lot of people didn't have a place they would feel comfortable. And then you would have these theaters in like, yes, big cities, but sometimes not big cities putting on these productions. And people would go in and be like, oh my God, this was such an accepting, eye-opening experience that I didn't know I could be a part of. And I have like found a part of who I am in this. Because it is, like, as we said, it's hypersexual, but it's very, like, everything is gender bending. Everything is, like, Frankenfurter's having sex with everyone. Like, it is
Literally
just,
everyone.
yeah. And Amanda wrote, "This is the gayest shit I've ever seen," which it is.
Yeah, it is. It's the gayest shit I've ever seen. And it's about sexual liberation. And
Yeah.
I was telling Jess before recording, I think Rocky Horror and Shaun of the Dead are very similar films, coincidentally, because A, they are paying homage to a specific genre or genres of film, and also not taking it seriously. And B, I think that they're both, like, the message behind it is, like, to live your life authentically, to, like, fully live your life. Like, I think the point of Shaun of the Dead is that he's just going through the motions of life. I don't think he gets the message, but I think that is the message for the audience.
Yep.
And it's like, the song that they sing during the pool orgy is, like, don't dream it, be it. And though this is very much about sexual liberation, I also felt like it was just in general. I think the last line of the movie from the criminologist is, like, humans were lost or directionless in time, space, and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I quite like that. And I also quite like that it is very gay. Also, I mean, like, Frankenfurter, he uses he, him pronouns, has long hair, lots of makeup, corsets all the time. So he's dressing effeminate, using he, him pronouns, and having sex with everyone. And we love that.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about some of the, like, references?
Yeah, in mention of what I just said, I thought this was cool. I did have so many notes about things because there were things that just, like, I knew I could tell it was a reference because they would throw out a name, but I wouldn't know what that was, and I would have to look it up.
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of, like, symbolism in it. When the married couple is driving off from the church, it shows the tombstone that says, "Be just and fear not," which I tried looking up, and that's kind of, it might be biblical, it might be Shakespeare, it's, like, been used around, but in general, it's the idea of, like, be a good person and just, and you have nothing to worry about. To set the scene of when exactly this is taking place, when Brad and Janet are driving through the storm, Nixon's resignation speech is playing on the radio.
On the radio. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I could tell that that's what it was, but I still had to look up that that was the actual one and not, like, a fake one, and no, that was the actual one.
Mm-hmm.
So that was cool. Obviously, it's called Frankenstein Place, and we've got the, like, Igor-esque character, and we've got the Bride of Frankenstein hair with magenta. There's Rocky's big song. He says the sword of Damocles is hanging over my head, so I had to look up what that was. That was just kind of like a Greek thing. Do you know about the sword of Damocles?
Mm-mm.
It's like an old myth or legend about Damocles was, like, poor, and Dionysus was the king, and he'd done a lot of bad stuff, so he had a lot of enemies, but they were friends, and Damocles was like, "Wow, it must be so cool to be a king and, like, get served all the time," and Dionysus was like, "Why don't you try it for a day?" So he let him try it for a day, and he had a great time being served, but the whole time, Dionysus had a sword hanging by a single horsehair above the throne to, like, symbolize, like, the pressure he feels that it could snap at any time and he could
Mm-hmm.
die. And I don't really know how that pertains to Rocky other than, I guess, like, he's one of a kind.
Yeah.
I read that O'Brien didn't mean for this to come off as trans as it did initially. But I know that's surprising, right? Because it's excessively. And I mentioned that he is.
But, like, also, what do you mean? How did you not? Like,
I know.
It's the whole film, the entire thing.
I think because he meant it more to be sci-fi and horror than like a comment. I don't know, but he has been quoted as being kind of controversial, despite being third gender, for saying that, like, he supports gender affirmation care, and I think he himself has been on estrogen, and, like, having sexual reassignment surgery is great, and do it if it, like, makes you feel empowered and stuff like that. But he said, his words, "You will never be a natural woman."
Mm.
And I kind of wonder if that do you think that mentality kind of leads into this transness being also the center of our sci-fi world?
Yeah, I think it's purposeful that it's a sci-fi world and a horror world and this weird reality, and then they're purposely putting a lot of transness and non-binary and just like bending kind of what traditional ideas of gender are in
Mhm.
this world. I think is purposeful. Like,
It's like I don't know that he did it on purpose, but I think that is maybe a perspective that heavily came out.
yeah. Yeah.
Because that is very much everything, like, the thing they use to glue the people to the floor is the transducer, and
Yeah.
the Medusa ray is the only thing that doesn't have trans in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Things that we didn't love as much. This freaking whole thing is a fever dream that I'm like, I don't know if I don't have anything I didn't love. It was just, like everything is just a thing, you know? But the only thing I noted is I love a musical with the narrator. One of my favorite musicals of all time is Drowsy Chaperone, and it has a huge narrator role. And I know there's other popular musicals that also use this. Um, I just didn't think it translates as well on film.
Mhm.
Like the scenes with the criminologist slash narrator, I'm kind of like, was this necessary, or could have we just like watched it happen? Because it's like he would tell us things and then we would watch it happen, and then he would tell us things and then we would watch it, and I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
if I need it. But then when you go and watch it with the shadow cast and everyone shouting out things, like his role then becomes fun. But I just don't think just sitting down and watching it, I was kind of like, it feels a little unnecessary.
I get where you're coming from with that. I was kind of neutral on the narrator. I don't think he added anything. I don't think he really detracted. I kind of didn't like. I know they call him the criminologist, but I didn't really get that was his role. I think it would be better in a stage production.
Agreed.
The thing that bothered me was when Riff Raff comes in and kills everyone. Is he's using an antimatter gun, and it's called an antimatter gun. And when he shoots them, they just
They
die.
just die.
The name of antimatter implies that it would dissolve. It would get rid of the matter, the physical matter. But when they die, the matter is still there. They're not dissolving. Maybe
No.
this is because it was low budget. Maybe because it's in a theater, they can't die or they can't dissolve. Maybe because it's just camp as hell to call it antimatter and then not actually make that real.
Yeah.
But it bothered me.
Yeah, I didn't like really think about it that hard, but you're completely right. It's not an antimatter gun. It's just a gun without bullets that kills people.
Yeah, it's just a laser gun.
Some fun quotes.
Mhm.
And one of in an early on scene, Frankenfurter says, "Well, babies, don't you panic." And I see you wrote this, so I'm going to add it because these lines actually go one after another. He goes, "Well, babies, don't you panic. I'll get you a satanic mechanic." And I just loved that he casually referred to them as babies because that is what they were being.
I liked the satanic mechanic because what is that?
Yeah.
What's a satanic mechanic?
Yeah, no, fair. There's also this scene where
Oh my
they're
god.
introducing Rocky and they're
I
asking
hate it.
Frankenfurter is asking Janet, like, "Oh, what do you think about Rocky?" And Janet's like, "I don't like men with too many muscles." And Frank goes, "Well, I didn't make him for you." And I just loved that.
Okay, that I loved. There's so many moments where Frank's like, he needs reassurance, but also is like, fuck you. This is the perfect specimen. The part that I was like ready to hate was the next quote that you wrote.
Okay, I don't remember the background of when this happens. Do you remember?
This is in the lab, and I don't know what exactly they're saying. I just know Brad butts in and like speaks over Janet or something.
Yeah, and Frank says it, right?
Yeah.
And Frank is like such a perfect specimen of manhood, so dominant. But he's clearly like talking down on Brad because Brad is an asshole.
Yeah.
But it's great.
But Brad is a fucking asshole, and I hate him. He speaks over Janet all the time, and he looks like in Damn It, Janet, he seems like the dweebiest, like, meekest little fucker, and like he's generally nothing. And then as soon as they're in the castle, he just becomes the biggest asshole, and like I hate him. Anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really liked some of the quotes. There's at one point Frankenfurter says, "I hold the secret to life itself," which is about creating Rocky, but I did like it as a queer person saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Also it's in Columbia's verse, which is the first verse of the song when they're being turned back into humans after being statues in the penultimate scene.
Mm-hmm.
She sings about how she loved Frankenfurter, and then he tossed her aside, and then she was in love with Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
And she says she told him she hoped he would stay sane inside insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really, like, try to wrap your head around, like, what that means.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is what we're doing, like, everyday living.
I know!
Especially in the last 3 years. Like,
especially as a mentally ill human.
I feel like that is all we are trying to do every day.
Literally, I saw a friend yesterday, and she's like, "So how have you been?" And I was like, really bad and really good, and I don't really know.
Yeah. Literally.
There's also one point Frankenfurter tells Janet, "You're as sensual as a pencil."
Yeah, I wrote that one down too, but then I was like, oh, it's not as important. But I did love it because she kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
Until she has her like awakening, and then she's just like a little.
Oh, but he says that
dog.
after the awakening.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. She is a horn dog, though,
mm-hmm.
which is my favorite part of the film. It's the most iconic part of me, to me, is just young Susan Sarandon being a horn dog.
Yeah.
Which, fun fact, she got pneumonia while filming this.
Mm-hmm. I did read that.
And then also I enjoyed, there's a point where Riff Raff and Magenta, before they come in to be like, "We're your new leaders," they do try to tell Frankenfurter, like, "Hey, this shit's been weird. We should just go home." And he's like, "No." And they're like, "We've been serving you loyally." And Magenta says, like, I think Frankenfurter says, "You ask too much of me." And Magenta's like, "I ask for nothing." And he says, "And you shall receive it in abundance."
Yeah.
Which is so fucking sassy.
Kind of an asshole, but in the best way.
He murders Eddie with a pickaxe, and when Rocky looks scared, he says, "Don't worry, it was a mercy killing." Oh, yeah. We didn't get to that. So the reason Eddie has the scar on his head is because Frankenfurter used half of his brain for Rocky's brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just that's fine. He took half of a human brain and put the other half back in.
Mm-hmm. Also, like, we kind of touched on it. I guess we did. They're aliens. It's aliens.
We kind of touched on it. Their whole entire castle gets beamed back up to
yeah. I just don't remember explicitly being like, "And they're aliens," but yes, it does get beamed back to their planet.
Yes, Magenta says they are from the planet Transvestite in the galaxy Transylvania.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This is like rounding off our spooky season. I think this is the perfect film. It's a little spooky, a little horror. It's really fun. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. If you can go watch a Shadowcast, go do that. But I had a lot of fun this spooky season. I'm looking forward to what we are gonna plan next. But we hope that you've been enjoying these spooky season episodes.
Yeah, we've had the most fun planning this content. We hope you've enjoyed it. And have a happy Halloween wherever you are. And if you're listening to this on Halloween or after Halloween and you're like, "Man, now I have to wait another year to watch Rocky Horror." No, you don't. It happens year-round in a lot of cities. So go out, be queer in every way.
Yep. Follow us on all our socials, 90s Babies Nostalgia on Instagram and YouTube. Spell out the word 90s. We're also on TikTok, but use the numbers there. Rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave a comment, DM us, chat with us. Let us know like what some of your favorite films are, particularly if they're like kooky Halloween or cozy Halloween. As we mentioned, we're both kind of less into the horror, so we would love to know maybe we're missing out on some other kind of Halloween-y films that we're not watching. So I would love to know what your favorites are.
Also, if you are not American, let us know if you celebrate Halloween and if you do anything for it.
Yeah.
And what your impression is.
And other than that, we'll see you in the next one. Have a very happy Halloween. Stay spooky. And bye.
Baby.